Suddenly, she almost jumped out of her shoes. An arm reached out and grabbed the pole. "I've told you 1,000 times," Mr. McDougall was saying, "to leave my stuff alone." He jerked the pole out of her grasp, untangled the line, and reeled it in. Then he stalked into the house. Mrs. McDougall followed, very indignant and frustrated. If her plan had worked, she would have heard Agent Graham's voice as he reported in. "I've got him!" "Where are you?" Zeke asked excitedly. "I don't know," came Graham's answer. "And I don't have much time to find out. I've doubled back so much." Agent Kelly reported in. "I've got him now. He's going into a house, I think. I can see some people through a lighted window." Zeke tensed. "Move cautiously. They may be armed. And wait for the others," he added. In a moment of silence, Zeke heard Patty's small voice. "There won't be any shooting, will there?" "I hope not, Miss Randall," he said gently. Ingrid, meantime, simply sat down and closed her eyes. "They're all mad," she mumbled. "All mad." Graham's voice came over. "The front door's unlocked. We're going in." "Good," Zeke told him. "But wait for Kelly to cover the back window. Got that, Kelly?" "Affirmative," came the terse reply. There were a few moments of stillness. Then bedlam broke out in the Randall house. There was the rush of footsteps down the hall. The door to Ingrid's room burst open, and Graham entered, gun leveled. Simultaneously, the window rattled and opened, and Agent Kelly stuck his gun in. "All right, you," he commanded. "Drop it." Zeke's gun came out at the first sound. He was so surprised that it was a moment before he recognized his fellow agents. Finally, they all put their weapons away and looked at each other sheepishly. "The cat came in here," Graham explained. "Are you out of your mind?" Zeke said. "There's no cat." He sneezed violently. When Patty recovered from her fright, she looked under the bed. The others followed. There was DC, crouching against the wall. "The poor darling, he's scared to death," Patty wailed. And Ingrid begged, "Will someone please tell me what's going on?" All Zeke could say, between sneezes, was, "That darn cat!" That night in the criminal's apartment, Margaret stood in the kitchen and looked hopelessly at the window over the sink. Like all the others, it was nailed down and heavily draped. She didn't know how much longer she would be able to stand the strain. In a desperate move, she tossed a lighted match into the wastebasket and held it up to the curtains. The flames leaped high, bringing Dan and Iggy on the run. Dan quickly put out the fire and turned on Margaret in fury. "Nice try, lady," he said. "Another minute and you'd have had the fire department to the rescue." Just then there was a knock on the door and the landlady called, "Anybody home?" Iggy clapped a hand over Margaret's mouth and dragged her to another room. Dan opened the door a crack and the landlady pushed her way in. "Is something on fire?" she asked anxiously. "It's those awful cigars Iggy smokes," Dan told her. She wrinkled her nose. "He tells me your mother is sick," she said. "I brought her some hot soup." Dan took the bowl and thanked her. A moment later, Margaret heard the woman leave. She sank into a chair, weak with despair. Whenever Mrs. McDougall wanted a view of the neighborhood, she went out to the front yard and watered the roses. She was at her post the next morning when Gregory Benson drove up to take Ingrid to work. "I doubt whether Ingrid will feel like going to work today," she told Gregory. "The doctor was in her room till quite late last night." Gregory showed alarm. Mrs. McDougall added hastily, "Anyway, I assume he was the doctor." A few minutes later, when Ingrid came out, Gregory greeted her a bit stiffly. "Good morning, Ingrid. I hope you're feeling better today." Ingrid did not answer. She was in an irritable mood. The night's adventure had upset her, and she was still annoyed at Gregory over the duck incident. When he continued to ask questions, she accused him of listening to Mrs. McDougall's gossip. Before they had gone 3 blocks, they were quarreling. When Gregory had to stop Stop. When Gregory had to stop for a traffic light, Ingrid jumped out of the car in a huff and took the bus to the office. Excuse me. I still don't think you can follow a cat night after night, Ingrid said flatly. It was nearly 9 o'clock, and Zeke was waiting impatiently for DC to stir. What? I thought Ingrid was gone to work. I think that's supposed to say Patty. I'm going to change that to Patty. I still don't think you can follow a cat night after night, Patty said flatly. It was nearly 9 o'clock, and Zeke was waiting impatiently for DC to stir. Supervisor Newton shares your doubts, Zeke told her. I had a meeting with him today. He gave me just one more night. Zeke sneezed. Gesundheit, Patty said. Did you tell him about the collar? He took a dim view of that, too, Zeke admitted. He doesn't think you can bug a cat. I don't either, Ingrid said. Wait, I'm so confused. I thought Ingrid had gone to work. Well, okay. I don't either, Ingrid said. Not even Super Cat here. Zeke put one of the small... I'm so confused. Is Ingrid at home or is she at work? Zeke put one of two small collars on the growling DC. Patty picked up the other. Well, I'm betting on DC and the FBI. Here, look. She showed Ingrid one of the studs in the collar. That is a tiny microphone. Mr. Kelso can hear DC meow, and anything that goes on near him. And this, she continued, indicating another tiny stud, gives off a little beep constantly. She picked up a small portable instrument from among Zeke's gear. And Mr. Kelso can pick it up on this. It's a direction finder. The needle tells which way DC's going. Now I've heard everything, Ingrid remarked skeptically. All right, I'll show you, Patty declared. And before the protesting Ingrid quite knew what was happening, Patty gave her the collar and pushed her into a closet in a far part of the house. There, she said, Mr. Kelso will come straight to you. You'll see. And with that, she closed the door. So I guess Ingrid is at work. Ingrid's not at work. Very confusing. But Agent Kelso did not come right away. Canoe arrived at that moment, and Patty left with him for a drive-in movie and forgot to tell Zeke. It soon became stifling in the closet, and Ingrid spoke into the tiny collar. It seemed a very silly thing to do. Mr. Kelso, she said, I want out of here. Zeke, who was absorbed in his plans for the night, was startled at the sound of a voice. Absent-mindedly, he turned to DC and said, It isn't 9 o'clock yet, old man. Ingrid discovered to her horror that the latch was stuck and she was trapped inside the closet. She pounded on the door and screamed. Finally, Zeke heard. He grabbed the direction finder and went straight to the rescue. Excuse me. He pulled on the knob with all his strength, but the latch held. There was nothing to do but remove the hinges. Then, as Ingrid pushed, he gave a mighty jerk, and the door flew off. He fell backwards on the floor. The door came down on top of him, and Ingrid, exhausted and disheveled, and very, very angry, landed atop the heap. When Zeke got back to the bedroom, DC had left. Quickly he collected his instruments, but when he got to the alley, the signals from DC's collar were very faint. He ran as fast as he could in the direction indicated, and finally caught up with his informant. He was sitting atop a fence, enjoying the frenzied barking of a dog on the ground below. Zeke, though, did not enjoy it. The sound coming through the receiver almost split his eardrums. Finally, DC tired of the dog's noise and jumped down on the other side of the fence. He found himself in a drive-in movie. Soon he realized that the area was truly a gold mine of discarded bits of food. While DC walked happily under the cars, Zeke was having his troubles. "Hey, mister," the manager shouted at him. "You can't drive in there without a car." Zeke was too busy trailing Darn Cat to explain, so the manager gave chase. Zeke's instruments told him that he was right upon his informant, but he could not see hide or hair of him. Then it occurred to him that DC might be in a car. Sure enough, there sat Canoe and Patty in a car nearby, unaware that DC was in the back seat. Agent Kelso from that moment was a very busy man. He had to get DC back on the job again, and he had to elude the manager. He simply didn't have time to explain that he was an FBI agent trailing a cat. By tossing tiny pebbles at the car, he eventually attracted Patty's attention and got her to put DC out of the car. Then the chase really got underway. DC, sensing that something was wrong, ran for his life. He darted around and over parked cars, up one row and down another. Zeke managed to keep him in sight. Meantime, the manager was determined to capture this madman who was disturbing his customers. In the emergency, he took to the tops of the cars where he could make better speed, frightening the occupants almost out of their wits. At last, Darned Cat saw an unobstructed path ahead of him and darted down it. It was the path to the refreshment stand, and a portly man had just started down it. En route to his family car, he carried a cardboard tray full of malted milks, hot dogs, and French fries. When he saw a large cat almost under his feet, he did a neat balancing act. He twisted and turned in the manner of a ballet dancer and managed to miss DC. Hot on his heels came Zeke, but luckily they managed to dodge each other. The man sighed with relief and took a few steps forward. This time he was off guard. He and the manager collided head-on. Both went crashing down in a messy avalanche of French fries, hot dogs, and malted milks. For Zeke, it was a fortunate accident. He was able to follow the informant without further incident back to the Randall neighborhood. DC decided to drop by and annoy Blitzy before turning in. In Gregory's backyard, he swatted at the pigeon cage, arousing all the birds, then headed for the back door. Blitzy barked hysterically. The noises brought Gregory to the kitchen window with a shotgun. He didn't see DC, but he thought he could make out a man's form in the shrubbery. He fired a shot into the air. DC shot out of there, as though jet-propelled. Then Gregory thought he saw a man darting across the yard, so he fired a second blast and gave chase. Moments before, Canoe had brought Patty home from the drive-in movie and was just returning to his car when he heard the shots. As he stood listening, the action started. First, DC shot by him. Then came Zeke full steam ahead. Next thing he knew, a man was running toward him, wildly brandishing a shotgun. Canoe had no wish to be a dead hero. He immediately raised both hands in surrender. But Gregory charged past him and up the Randall steps. Gun in hand, he alternately rang the bell, pounded on the door, and shouted, creating a great uproar. Upstairs in the temporary communications center, there was near panic. Patty was wringing her hands and crying. "They've shot DC. I know they have." "DC's all right," Zeke consoled her. "They missed him by a mile." As the hammering continued, he started pulling out his equipment in alarm. "It's Gregory," Ingrid whispered. He belonged to the duck DC stole. He gets awful mad, awful fast." "You'd better let him in," he told Ingrid. "But whatever else you do, keep him out of this room." While Ingrid went to the door, Patty and Zeke grabbed wildly at everything that was not Ingrid's and tossed it into the clothes closet. "If you came here to murder DC in cold blood," they heard Ingrid saying. And Gregory retorted, "I'm not after your stupid cat. I saw a prowler head this way. I've got to search your house. Make sure you're safe." Zeke grabbed the last bit of evidence and jumped into the closet only seconds before Gregory entered the bedroom. Afterwards, he never could explain it, but just as he was closing the door, DC shot in too. DC rubbed against Zeke's legs, and he felt a sneeze coming on. He pressed a forefinger lightly against the base of his nose to suppress it. He knew he couldn't hold out for very long. He was smothering in the clothing and equipment, and he scarcely had room to breathe. He sighed with relief as Gregory appeared to be leaving. Then it happened. DC began howling. Zeke was paralyzed by shock as DC continued shrieking, as only a Siamese can. It belatedly dawned upon Zeke that he was standing on DC's tail. He raised a foot, and DC shot out as the door was flung open. Zeke and Gregory stood nose to nose, staring at each other. Gregory stood glued to the floor, holding his shotgun by the barrel. Zeke was the first to recover. "The wiring seems to be okay, Miss Randall," he said as nonchalantly as he could. He got out of the house before the dumbfounded Gregory could stop him.